I learned about and I realized how my fixed mindsets had gotten in the way of my goals. A fixed mindset is the belief that people are set the way they are, and it's differentiated from a growth mindset, which is the belief that people can change, that our abilities and our qualities are malleable. And these are things that we are all sometimes in a fixed mindset, and it's a spectrum, and our mindsets change. But when we think, for example, that leaders are good leaders because they're natural leaders, or you're a natural athlete, that's an example of a fixed mindset. The result is that we don't work to develop ourselves, and also we become kind of defensive when we receive feedback. When we struggle, we take it as a sign of incompetence, so we give up and try to do other things. So I started seeing how these beliefs that I had about the fixed nature of abilities had really been problematic for me. But the other thing that I learned was that the belief was important and necessary, but it wasn't sufficient. What we also need to understand is how to change and how to improve.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow?
Today we look at improving team performance. Do you think about improving your team performance? Well, when you want to rise to the next level, you may know exactly what you need to do. How do you engage the team to do it? And what are the things that get into the way of it? There's actually a phenomenon out there called the performance paradox. Now, I didn't write the book, but our guest today did. Our guest today is the author of The Performance Paradox, and Eduardo Briceño is an incredible resource if you want to improve the performance of yourself and your team, and to help you understand kind of what gets in the way and some of the strategies to help you move to that next level. Today, we talk about and focus on improving team performance across the organization. And as a leader, I think it's something that you might want to pay attention to. My job is to help you perform at your highest level, to help you be the leader that your team deserves. And when you are that leader, you will have more engaged people. You will have higher performance. You will have a higher retention rate. You will have people addressing challenges and taking ownership. And hopefully that sounds exciting to you, because when you are the leader that people want to follow, that's what happens. I'm an executive coach, so that's one way we serve our clients. Another way is through leadership development, where we turn leaders into managers. Actually, let me back up. We actually turn managers into leaders. Managing alone isn't bad, but when you move to that next level of leadership, you really are engaging something quite powerfully. So how do I help you? We can do it through a coaching. We can do it through helping your team through the leadership development platforms that we offer in the coaching. But we also offer something free called the Leadership Effectiveness Evaluation. It is a tool that I've used with CEOs, I've used with executive teams, and I've used with teams to help them understand where leadership is right now, where we need to focus, and help you prioritize your plan as you grow and really optimize your organization in terms of leadership. It's a way to codify it. The Leadership Effectiveness Evaluation is absolutely free if you're listening to this podcast and you mention it when you book your call with me. Otherwise, it's $1,000. So all you have to do is go to genehammett.com, schedule your call, and mention the Leadership Effectiveness Evaluation that you heard it on the podcast. That's all you have to do. Now, here's the interview with Eduardo. Edward, how are you?
Doing well. How are you doing, Gene?
Eduardo, right?
Yes.
Do you go by both?
No, I go by Eduardo.
Eduardo, we're going to have a great conversation about the book that you've recently written. And before we dive into the performance paradox, tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. I'm originally from Venezuela. I ended up finishing high school in the U.S. unexpectedly and going to college here. And I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I just always just put my head down and did what I was told, and got into what I would say is a rut, of like just working hard at school and then working hard at work. I worked in investment banking in New York City, and then moved to venture capital in Silicon Valley, spent several years doing that, and eventually got really sick with a repetitive strain injury that I started losing function in my hands. I started losing the ability to use my hands, and I met people who had my same condition who couldn't use their hands for more than 10 minutes a day. And so that freaked me out. I was 27 years old, and I realized that I needed to learn a lot about how to heal, and it was a condition that was hard to diagnose and treat, but also I needed to like really figure out how I wanted to live, because I was living like a zombie and I didn't feel like I was being a good steward of my life. And so I went to grad school to find a different path and develop a different path. And over there, I met Stanford professor Carol Dweck, who had recently written her seminal book, Mindset. And she was looking for somebody with a business background to start an organization with, to bring growth mindset out into the world. At that point, nobody had heard of it. And so we co-founded an organization, been doing this work for the last 16 years with her as a mentor. And now I am a public speaker. I help companies develop cultures of learning and high performance.
Well, that's an incredible background. And I appreciate you going back through some of the things that got you to where you are, because we all go through these challenges. But we came here to talk about your book. So I'm going to let you dive in. The Performance Paradox. I love to understand how, because I know how hard it is to write a book. So why did you have to write this book?
Well, in working with Carol, I learned about and I realized how my fixed mindsets had gotten in the way of my goals. A fixed mindset is the belief that people are set the way they are. And it's differentiated from a growth mindset, which is the belief that people can change, that our abilities and our qualities are malleable. And these are things that we are all sometimes in a fixed mindset, and it's a spectrum, and our mindsets change. But when we think, for example, that leaders are good leaders because they're natural leaders, or you're a natural athlete, that's an example of a fixed mindset. The result is that we don't work to develop ourselves, and also we become kind of defensive when we receive feedback. When we struggle, we take it as a sign of incompetence, so we give up and try to do other things. So I started seeing how these beliefs that I had about the fixed nature of abilities had really been problematic for me. But the other thing that I learned was that the belief was important and necessary, but it wasn't sufficient. What we also need to understand is how to change and how to improve. And that wasn't obvious, because often most of us have the sense that in order to succeed and to get better, we need to work hard. And just if we just work hard, we'll get better and we'll succeed. And what I learned is that that's not true, is that it's not that simple, because what most of us end up doing is we focus on getting things done only. So on doing things the best we know how, trying to minimize mistakes, and that leads to stagnation. And so when I had this realization for myself, I started incorporating it into the workshops that we were doing on growth mindset. Because when people learn about growth mindset, they said, that's awesome. This belief is really powerful, but what do I do? How can we change? How can we improve? And this is one way to help people like develop that insight and have conversations. And that's what it did. So it generated powerful insights and powerful discussion and alignment between teams and in between leaders on how they wanted to lead. And so I said, okay, like this is something that's being really helpful to people. I want to make it accessible to people who are not in this room with me. And so I did a TEDx talk on it, and it became very popular. It's being watched by over 4 million people now. It's part of TED at Work. And the book is a way to continue making these ideas and strategies more accessible to more people in a way that we can go deeper, right? So it's for people to understand what the performance paradox is. That's chapter 1. And then what to do about it, which is chapters 2 through 14, is how do we embed not just the performance zone, but also the learning zone into our life and our work and our habits, both as individuals and in collaboration with others, so that we can always continue to improve and better achieve our goals.
Now, Eduardo's been talking about a fixed mindset. Now, most people don't say that they have a fixed mindset. So you got to look for the clues when they're talking. I had a client one day who was telling me about how he was not very patient. In fact, he would set big goals and the team would perform really well, but they wouldn't get everything done. And they were performing really, really well, top 5% in his terms. But he was impatient. Those are the words he used. And he said, that's just the way I am. And so I asked him if he believed that he had a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. Of course, he said he had a growth mindset. And I said, well, why are you saying the words, that's just the way I am? Because that tells me that it's fixed. And it caught him off guard. And I share this little detail with you because I want to make sure you have the tools to move forward. If you are saying those words to yourself, that's just who I am, or something similar, or you hear it from another person, pause, ask a question, probe, be curious. It will help you understand them better, and it would help you really move things forward. That's your job as a leader. Back to Eduardo. That was a big start to this and why it had to be written. And I I love the mindset work that you guys have come from, and you know, I've used this inside my own coaching, because working with executives, you've got to address mindset, because otherwise, you know, just strategy alone doesn't get you there. There was a couple of things in there I want to make sure that you explain to us. The performance paradox, what exactly is it, so that we understand, you know, this book as the problem?
Absolutely. Thank you for that follow-up question, because it is something that we need to kind of wrap our heads around a little bit and kind of question our mental models. The best way to understand this is to step out of our context and look at fantastic performers, like world-class performers in domains where performance can be objectively measured. Like, for example, you know, sports or the performance arts or chess. These people are objectively better than other people and objectively world-class. And so what do they do to become so good? If you look at, for example, like a world-class athlete, like say a world-class tennis player, right? They're playing in a championship final, in a tournament, and they're having trouble with a particular move. Like say they're having trouble with their top spin serve. They're going to avoid that top spin serve, that move in that match, because their goal is to win. That's a performance time, is what I call the performance zone. After the match, they're going to go to their coach and say, Coach, I need to work on my top spin serve. Let's work on that. And that's a very different activity and area of attention than what we do when we're performing. And so we tend to think that the reason that tennis players become so good at what they do is because they spend a lot of time playing tennis, but that's not true. You know, they spend a lot of time doing something very different from playing tennis, right? But paying attention to what they haven't mastered yet, what they're struggling with, what's at the next level of challenge, and it's what they do in the learning zone that allows them to develop their skills and excel in the performance zone. So, for example, if you look at the research that looks at how much better do medical doctors get better over time, the more years of experience that they have on the job. On average, they actually get worse. Like the more years of experience, the worse their patient outcomes. And the reasons they're so busy executing, seeing patients, diagnosing, and treating, that most of them, obviously some of them do get better over time, but most of them on average, they forget information that's relevant to infrequent diagnosis, or they might not keep up with new technologies and new techniques. And as a result, their performance decreases over time. But the ones who increase over time, they understand the performance paradox, and what they do is they embed learning into their habits so that they are regularly leaping beyond the known, you know, seeking new information, experimenting, trying. In the case of doctor, you wouldn't do it with a patient, but in our work, it might be like experimenting with things that might not work, right? Or soliciting feedback or examining mistakes. Those are things that are different than just getting things done as best as we know how all the time.
Eduardo, I think you said it, but I want to make sure it really is clear for the audience here. The paradox.
Yeah.
Explain the paradox in like one sentence for us.
Sure. So the performance paradox is a counterintuitive phenomenon that if we focus only on performing, our performance suffers.
That's what I wanted to make sure we highlighted, because
absolutely. And
I think a lot of us will focus on that performance, right? We'll focus on the act of doing the thing, and whereas the way we get better, maybe not doing the thing over and over and over.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say the performance zone is really important. That's how we get things done. We do want to perform, and sometimes we want to only perform and put learning aside. But if we're in the last week of a quarter, we're a salesperson, we need to make quota, and we just want to sell. It's reasonable to say, I'm just going to focus on making as many calls as possible, using the strategies that I think are best, and just focus on performing this week. The problem is when we treat every week like as if it was the last week of the quarter, and then we stagnate, and then our performance suffers in the next quarter and next year, right?
I got a question about the learning zone.
Yeah.
How do we get ourselves to stop focusing on the performance, doing the thing, to really step back and really get into that learning zone? Is there kind of a technique or something you've learned over the years?
Well, there are many different learning zone strategies and techniques and habits that we can build. So depending on our context, our kind of harmony of tools and habits, we can each use different things, but we can start by reflecting. And then I'll start with individuals. You know, we could also talk about kind of what leaders can do to foster this in their organizations. But we can think about what's most important to me, and what do I want to improve? What do I want to get better at? And then what are the effective strategies to improve at that thing. Like if I want to become a better tennis player, deliberate practice is really important, and spending a couple hours a day practicing. For most of us, that's not practical. If I want to become better at having tough conversations, for example, I can't just have tough conversations and continue doing the same thing all the time. I have to seek new information and new strategies, new techniques. I might go to my peers and say, hey, or a mentor, I want to have this conversation with this person. What are some ways that I could approach that? I could role play with somebody. I could solicit feedback after a conversation, right? To get information of how I came across or what I could have done differently. And those are examples of the learning zone that are not just about just doing the thing, just like you said. But I think it boils down to building habits, right? It's like making this easy and part of the way we work and live, not doing it every once in a while. And one powerful habit that I think any of us can do is just remind ourselves every morning of what am I working to improve and how am I going about it. That primes a growth mindset and primes the learning zone and starts us thinking about that every day, which then rewires our brain over time and makes this like the way that we think and the way we go about our day.
Now, Eduardo set up my next book called Tough Conversations. Not sure when you're listening to this. We're still writing it, but we have a framework available for you. If you go to genehammett.com/tough conversations, you're able to download this framework. No emails required. Just go get it. Tough conversations are the key to you getting through and creating alignment across your team. If people are not in line with the culture or the values, or there's some kind of attitude problem or behavior problem that you want to shift, the journey through that is through mastering tough conversations. We want to give you the framework. We're writing the book. So if you are looking for the book, the title right now is How to Have Tough Conversations. Be on the lookout for it because it will help you be the leader that your team deserves. Back to Eduardo. Eduardo, we've been talking about your book, The Performance Paradox, and we've been talking mostly from an individual perspective, which I know is a big part of your book, but you also have this team element to The Performance Paradox. What do we need to know about getting teams to increase their performance?
Sure. So yeah, we are sometimes when we think about kind of growth mindset or the learning zone, even leaders might think my people just need a growth mindset, right? And so if this person is more in a fixed mindset or doesn't have good habits, then how am I going to work with this person? They're not the right person. Versus how do I create the culture and the shared habits and understanding that make this the easy way to think and behave for everybody. And so for leaders, we can first frame and set the stage, meaning, what do we value in this team or in this company? What's important to us? And is working to change ourselves and to improve part of what work is about and what our collaboration is about. So framing is number one. Number two is systems and habits. What systems and habits do we want to use in order to perform, which is very common, but also in terms of learning, how in order to learn. So for example, the top 100 leaders at LinkedIn have a weekly meeting, and a section of that meeting, they talk about what anybody learned the prior week and what they can do differently going forward. So that makes the conversation really easy to have like a learning zone conversation as part of that meeting. Excuse me. So what are the systems and habits we want to embed? To embed the learning zone into our performance systems. And finally, modeling learning. So as leaders, sometimes we talk about the importance of learning, but we engage in our own learning in private when other people aren't watching. And if they observe us only as know-it-alls, then they will emulate know-it-all behaviors and we'll have a know-it-all culture. Or sometimes we might engage in learning zone behaviors in front of others. Like, for example, we might solicit feedback, but others might interpret that behavior in a different way than we think about it. So for example, a lot of people are afraid of feedback, or they might think that feedback is something that only people with low competence or low confidence do. People with like high competence don't solicit feedback. If that's how they think about feedback, and we solicit feedback as a leader, it might decrease our influence and they might think less of us. And so along with framing and setting the stage, we need to remind people, hey, remember that I'm a huge fan of feedback. We want to be soliciting feedback all the time. I would love your feedback on this, so that we are visibly modeling the behaviors and also helping people make sense of them.
Eduardo, as you were going through writing this book, I know that it's hard. You have to edit, you have to cut out things that you think are important. What did you realize about the work that you were doing as you beginning to finish this book that you felt like you didn't know before you started?
This book, you're absolutely right. I learned so much in going through the process. I worked super hard on the book for 3 years. I interviewed over 100 people, and it helped me get clear on my thinking. It helped me come up with new insights. It helped me in many different ways. Like before we started recording, you shared that when you're working on your book, you're thinking about some illustrations to add. That is one example of how the desire to put some illustrations into the book led me to think about what those might be. And that led me to new insights and new ways to communicating and even greater clarity. So for example, I have in chapter 1 an illustration called the Perform, Learn, Possibility Curve. And that is something that I hadn't thought about before, but working on the book pushed me to think about things more deeply and to come with clear ways of doing it. And then I learned a ton about amazing ways that fantastic learners and performers are embedding the learning zone into their days and lives and work as individuals and as teams were part of my research in interviewing people that are in the book. So tons of learning. And I could also talk about, other things like about leadership. One of the insights that I had was I always talked about the importance of modeling learning, just like I just said, doing the behaviors that we want others to do. And I had a new insight as I was interviewing people and thinking about this book, which is that sometimes leaders need to do what I call now asymmetrical modeling, which is if we want other people, for example, to speak up and challenge and share different ideas, we can't start by doing that ourselves, because our position of power might mean that then they just kind of sit back and listen to us. So we instead need to stay quiet and ask questions to help them speak up. And that's not exactly modeling the behaviors we want to see in others. So when do we engage in asymmetrical modeling? It's a new insight that I developed, straight out of working on the book.
That's probably one of my favorite questions that we asked here today, is to talk about what you're learning as you go through this. For those of you who haven't written a book, it's extremely hard to get your ideas written and organized in such a way, and you grow and you expand and you realize new things. So we had a great conversation here with the author of The Performance Paradox. Eduardo, thank you for being here and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you, Dean, for important work. It's great to be here.
Wow, what a great interview. I love interviewing authors who really understand their topic and have spent years mastering it and delivering it to the world before they decided to write the book. And that's the order at which I suggest people. You don't write a book so that you can get yourself known. You get yourself known by the work that you do, and then you write the book to organize those thoughts to the next level. And it's just part of the journey of really serving others. We serve leaders, and we want to serve you. We are executive coaches, so we can work with you and your teams to perform at a higher level. We also work from a leadership development standpoint with manager coaching. And so if any of those things interest you, just go to genehammett.com and schedule your call today. When you think of leadership and you think of growth, think of Growth Think Tank. As always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.